Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of OmenG's Stupid Scary Stories. Once again, today I'll be reading from Connecticut Ghost Stories and Legends, a book by Thomas D'Agostino and Arlene Nicholson, part of the Haunted America series. Today's story, Tory Den. Tory Den holds many dark secrets that have unfortunately been diluted over the passing of time. The stories themselves are but vague recollections of local legends, mostly forgotten due to the lack of oral tradition. Enough of the tales, however, have been saved for those who might desire to dip into the proverbial jar of poetic license and narrate embellishments of the place based on remaining folklore and history. There are two things that are certain. One, the place was a frequent stop for the legendary Leatherman, and two, the locale is haunted by some unknown entities that have inched their place in the history of the Den. The name of the Den is derived from the moniker given to British sympathizers of the Revolutionary War. There are several Tory caves in Connecticut, but most of them are located in Litchfield County. Many of the colonists sided with the throne of England during the struggle for freedom. These colonists believed that England was much too powerful to ever cede to a ragtag group of revolutionaries. Some even fought against their own neighbors in their belief that the king would always be their ruler. During the struggle, it is said that some of these Tories deserted their homes and ranks and sought shelter in the caves in attempts to escape the wrath of the enraged and vengeful insurgents. The harsh New England winters brought woe upon them, and many perished, perhaps leaving their resentful spirits behind to taunt those who venture into their hideaways. The most famous Tory Den is located within the Mile of Ledges and the Tory Den Trail in the southwest corner of Burlington on the Bristol border. During the time of the Revolution, parts of Bristol, Burlington, Harwinton, and Plymouth were heavily populated with British loyalists. The colonies feared that these loyalists were a great danger to the success of their cause and therefore sought to eradicate them from the land. When the Tories were captured, the revolutionaries would use various means to either punish them or convert them to their side for the cause of freedom. 17 loyalists were rounded up and examined at the home of David Bull on May 22, 1777, by a special committee of the General Assembly in Hartford. These were British sympathizers from the New Britain area who were found to be under the heavy influence of a certain Reverend James Nicholson, a Yale graduate and minister. Nichols had been tried by the Superior Court in Hartford on January 27, 1777 for treasonable practices, but had been acquitted. Nichols was subject to tar and feathering and was reported shot at several times. He then sold his farm and moved. It is written by E.L. Pond in the Tories of Chippeny Hill that he died miserably on June 17, 1829, at the home of one of his sons in New York at the age of 81. The Tories tended their farms in numbers for protection. If a solitary Tory was in danger, it was customary for him to flee to the secret cave for protection. The women of the families were sentinels who held an ever-watchful vigil for Tory hunters or members of the Continental Army. When such adversaries were spied, the women would blow either a horn or conch shell, thus signaling for the men to retreat to the cave. It is reported that multiple attempts to locate the cave were made in vain by the frustrated Sons of Liberty. Two young boys, Bella A. Welton and X. A. Welton, the latter a grandson of Stephen Graves, discovered the den in 1838. Graves, a devoted loyalist, had a log cabin less than a mile from the shelter. It is written that he and his colleagues hid in the cave on many occasions, and his wife stole away in the thick of night to bring them food. A massive slab of rock had fell from above, landing on two other wedges that supported the stone, creating the natural chamber. The southeast entrance is 10 feet wide and 5 feet high. The interior is the same width, but rises to 6 feet in height. There is a small opening in the center of the 35-foot-long den where a person can pass through. This may have been used as a chimney for small, discreet fires that kept the hideout somewhat warm in the colder months. Most often, however, they likely had to endure the unsavory New England weather without the comfort of a fire, or as the smoke may have been spied by the pursuant. The north face entrance is only 4 feet high and 5 feet wide. Present-day campers and hikers still hear the voices and heavy breathing of the British loyalists who have long dropped their arms yet still prowl among the living. Some have felt a heavy, fearful presence when visiting the shelter. Misty figures seem to hover around the cave as if holding an eternal vigil in hopes of remaining elusive to those they are hiding from. Perhaps one of them is the ghost of Moses Dunbar, the only known loyalist to be hanged for treason during the Revolution. Dunbar lived in a place then known as Chippeney Hill in the Bristol Farmington area. He was tried at the same time as Reverend Nichols, but he was not so fortunate. Dunbar, born June 14, 1746, swung from the gallows in Hartford on March 19, 1777, at the age of 30. It is written by Pond that Moses' father, an ardent revolutionary patriot, Sergeant John Dunbar, actually offered to furnish the hemp to hang his son. Strange lights have also been spied around the caves, but upon examination there is no human present to perpetuate them. Visitors to the den have also reported hearing the rhythm of drum beats. These ethereal poundings can be heard along the blue trail in the den. Their origin remains a mystery. Some have even reopened the wraith of famous Leatherman near the grotto he used as a shelter during his route around western Connecticut. He is, according to legend, known to still frequent or protect the caves he made regular slumber stops at from 1858 to 1889. Now, this story is obviously steeped in some serious history. We're talking about the birth of this country here, folks. Me being somewhat of a history buff myself, I was intrigued. I wanted to find out more about these loyalists, and if it was true what they said, that only one was hung. Now, doing a little research, I found out that yes, one was recorded to have been hung. Recorded. That doesn't mean that the Sons of Liberty or other patriotic groups didn't bring down their wrath and fury among those that they felt were traitors to the cause of freedom. To that, I dug more, deeper, found out that not only were there hangings, but in some cases, when these caves were discovered, the men, women, as well as children of these loyalist men that they found would be packed into these caves, the entrances sealed shut, left to starve or freeze to death, whichever one came first. Most cases, people would starve to death. Other cases, yes, they would freeze to death. But there were a few extremely brutal crimes that I happened upon finding. Now you ask yourself, how did I find out about this? Like I said, I went investigating, I did some digging, asked some questions, went to the areas, found families whose lineage dates back to that of the Revolutionary period. Found old documents, transcripts, journals, diaries. Read through them, poured through the information for days before I decided to actually visit some of these caves. Now there was one in particular that caught my fancy. Unlike most of the caves that were found, This one's entrance, you had to drop down into it. You know what I'm saying? It was in the ground. You had to go down, fall into like this opening, and then travel. And I wanted to do a little more investigating on this one, but I had to find out exactly where the exit was before I got myself stuck in here. It would have been a terrible occurrence, me becoming a ghost along with the ghost that I'm hunting, right? Didn't want that to happen, so did a little research, of course, a little exploring as well. Then I found out that there was a separate entrance. It was behind a small waterfall. You go out, and the waterfall covered, so it was hidden. And it obviously remained that way for many, many years. But there was an unfortunate feeling of dread when I entered the cave. Yes, I entered the cave, folks. Of course I did. Why wouldn't I? I wanted to find out more. But like I was saying before I was saying this part, I found out that there were some horrible things done to some of the people that were left inside these caves, besides being left to starve or freeze to death. In some cases, they were smoked out. That's right. Patriots would light these fires in the fronts of the cave and then block them in enough that you couldn't escape, but allowed the smoke to fill these cave systems, essentially suffocating those inside. Now, I heard of one such story of a family of supposed loyalists. Now, they had absolutely no real evidence to support their claims that the family, known as only the family on the farm, had anything to do with the British loyalists. They were accused of feeding and sending supplies to British soldiers and such. There were no claims to support this, or no support to these claims of such treasonous activities. Now, of course, depending on which side of this whole conflict you're on, treason could have been seen as what the Patriots were doing by rebelling against the King of England. Considering the fact that this is New England, it would beg to reason that those who wanted freedom from the crown were the ones who were wrong. So, like I said, this caused a serious divide in these communities, but also served as opportunity for those in the community, not doing as well as others to claim, oh, wait a minute, these people here are loyalists. We should seize their lands because they're giving stuff to the British. And that was the case with the family on the farm. They had come and immigrated like most, but from what I understand, they themselves were not from England. There's no real record of where these immigrants came from, how they got here, but it is known that they were killed in the most horrible way. And that they were killed for their land. Now, they had been there for a while. You know what I'm saying? They had been there long before these patriots even came into existence. Family had lived on this land for many years. Even had some relations with the Native Americans within the area. So, like I said, they go back before even the Declaration of Independence. They had no quarrel with either side. They just wanted to be left alone to do what they've been doing for years, which is farm their land, survive, and just do their thing. They cared not whether it was in British hands or whether it was in the hands of the Americans. They just wanted to live their life. There were 4 children, a husband, and a wife. And the wife's sister. So, you had 7 people in this household. The family on the farm. Now, during the height of the persecution of Tories, there was one landowner who had always had his eye on these people's farm. We'll call him Jebediah Scott. That's the name that I got, so that's what we're going to call him. Now, of course, there's no records in history of this particular dispute, but it's true. It does exist. Now, Jebediah Scott wanted their land. Their land was near a nice little pond, which gave them great water supply for their crops and animals. Jebediah's land was not as good. A lot of rocks, shit, no real source of water. A lot of times he had to bargain with other farmers for his water supply. He thought to himself, I'm tired of this shit. I want what I want. More land. And in particular, I want their land. I'm gonna have their land. He concocted a scheme. Not a very elaborate one, but elaborate enough and timed just perfectly. Now, just so happened that the neighbors of the family on the farm were loyalists. And of course, like I said, this family was friendly with all. They, like I said, took no sides. Now, one night when the Sons of Liberty were out rounding up different loyalists in different places, they came upon the family which lived next door to the family in the farm. We'll call them the Scotts for now. Well, not the Scotts, because that's Jebediah's last name. So we'll call them the Rileys, because I don't know who their names are. You know what I'm saying? There's no record. A lot of this time period, records were not kept of the atrocities committed against innocent people. Anyway, the Rileys fled their home, knowing that these Sons of Liberty were looking for them. They were known loyalists. Nobody was like, are they? May they not? No, they flew the British flag proudly on their home, as most of those in New England did during that time, till it became a crime. But they were proud of their lineage. We shall be told what flag to fly. As long as the king is on the throne, we shall fly the flag of Great Britain upon our homestead. Well, that would turn out to be their undoing. Like I said, the Sons of Liberty came looking for them. They fled their home, and just so happened to go to their neighbor's house, which isn't like right next door. People don't get the impression that they live like one house away. We're talking acres between each other, but they're still neighbors. So their land bordered each other. So through the night, they escaped into the barn of the family on the farm. Now the wife went out to the barn because she heard a ruckus. She found the family huddled together, scared, frightened. Only a few belongings. She knew what was going on. She knew. But rather than report them to the Sons of Liberty, she gave them some food, a little bit of blankets to keep them warm. Said, you can hide out here for the night, but you must leave in the morning because we don't want any problems. But we're not just going to turn you away or report you, so please, in the morning, be gone. And in the morning they were. But Jebediah Scott happened to see the Rileys leaving the property, not the barn, but the property of the family on the farm. He made a mental note of this. Because he knew, even though he really didn't care either what side won the war as long as he had his land. He was neither a patriot nor a loyalist, just an opportunist. Well, when he saw them leaving, like I said, he made a mental note of it. What he did with that information would later gain him the farm of the family on the farm. Another few months go by. Life is what it is. Every now and then, Sons of Liberty come through looking for loyalists. Well, Mr. Scott took this as his opportunity to make his move. He told the captain of the particular group that was dispatched to this town, hey, listen, I know of some loyalists. Not only are they loyalists, but they're helping other loyalists to escape, housing them, feeding them, clothing them. I've even heard that they've been sending supplies to the British soldiers. Of course, this piqued the captain's interest most intriguingly. "Show me these people, Mr. Scott. Show me who they are. We will reward you with their land." That was exactly what he wanted. He didn't even have to say it. Things were falling perfectly into his hands. Right into his hands they were falling perfectly, like I said. He brought them to the home of the family on the farm. The wife's sister answered the door and was surprised to see the Sons of Liberty at their door. "How can I help with you, good sir, Captain?" she spoke. "We have good information that you and your family here have been aiding the Crown, also the Loyalists and Tories within the area. We have heard that you are giving supplies and food to them and shelter, and have become a place of refuge. This is an act of treason of the worst kind. Not only are you helping the British, but you are helping their loyalists, which are in insurgency upon the Crown. You shall pay with your lives." "I know not what you speak of." "Stand aside!" Captain pushed her out of the way, walked into the house. The 4 kids were sitting down eating breakfast. I don't know exactly what they eat for breakfast back then, but they were eating it, whatever that is, for breakfast. Mother and father were in the kitchen discussing the day's work. The captain came in and saw them. "Traitors! How dare you aid the crown of the king?" "We know not what you speak of," said the father and husband to the captain. They were hearing none of it, though. They grabbed him, smacked him, beat him senselessly in front of his children, wife, and sister-in-law. Beat him almost to death. Threw him down on the ground, tied his hands behind his back, and let him out the door. What happened next, folks, I won't go into great detail, but let's just say the abuse that the women suffered was even worse than that of the husband. Terrible, vile things. Vile, terrible things. And all the while, these poor children, no older than the age of 10, witnessed this treachery and brutality. It's terrible. Now, after they had their way with the women, they tied their hands behind their back and led them out. The farmer, husband, father, brother-in-law, laying upon the ground weeping, he knew what was next, or so he thought he knew what was next. See, the crime that the Sons of Liberty were committing, even though these were supposed loyalists and traitorous people, the crimes which they were committing by defiling this man's wife and sister-in-law were punishable by death. And they knew this. They knew this. Now, Mr. Scott had no idea what was happening. He just brought them to the house and left and went on his fucking way. So he didn't know what he had caused. He had no idea what suffering he caused these people. He just figured they'd be arrested, possibly hung. He didn't really care about that. But a quick death nonetheless. And he'd get what he wanted, which was their land. Now, it just so happened, unfortunately for the family on the farm, that there was a cave on their land. But this was a small cave that you really wouldn't hide in. You know what I'm saying? Not like the magnitude of most of the caves. It's just a small little tiny, basically like a closet. You know what I mean? But that was all they needed to justify in their minds the terrible things that they had done to this family. But like I said, they couldn't mention what they had done, for they themselves would be put to death. So the captain spoke to his men. "This must never leave here. What we have done is a crime to God. Even though we are fighting for liberty and justice, what we have done here is wrong. Although I don't really care, because they are nothing but traitors anyway. Dogs, in my opinion. Dogs! Less than dogs. But if the lieutenant were to find out, well, our heads would be upon the block of chopping. That we cannot have. We must make a pact here, and now, never to speak of this again. And the things that are to happen later must never be spoken. So are we going to hang them, sir? No, we can't hang them. They can never have existed. If you understand what I am saying, you understand what I am saying. I don't understand what you're saying, Captain. You have to be clearer. He pulled out his pistol and shot this man dead. Shot him dead. The other 4 men with him understood he wasn't playing around. He couldn't have his title and honor destroyed. They knew that this was something that they would have to take to their graves. They also knew if that meant taking it to their graves, there would be no tribunal. There'd be no court. There'd be no hanging. What do you say did they do? Oh, well, what they did was terrible. They dragged out the children. If any of you are squeamish, don't want to hear the terrible things that happen to the kids, well, I suggest that you stop the video now. I won't go into too much detail because details are kind of sketchy. Like I said, I got this from journals and books and writings from that time period, so I believe that they are probably most likely true. Anyway, the children were killed. Smothered, most of them. After they were smothered, they were dismembered, chopped into pieces, arms and legs and head removed from the torso. But because they did not want any evidence of this found, the bodies were brought into the small cave that they found on the land. They were piled in there, along with straw and tar and other flammable materials, and they were burned to a crisp, while the sister, the mother, and the father were forced to watch this. No, they didn't kill them first. No, they killed the children first, in front of them, as if the vile things that they had done to them already were not enough. The father, having witnessed the death of his children, knowing what was coming, made one final attempt to die with honor in his mind. For he knew he was going to die. There was no escaping it. He ran at the captain, lunged at him, biting into his neck, tearing out a nice chunk of meat. He was shot down. Shot. The captain would later die that day of the wounds that he suffered from the bite. Ended up bleeding out, which left his men to have to do the rest of the work. They couldn't explain, or didn't want to explain, how their captain was killed, at least not in this way. So they got some knives and things and stabbed him up a little bit more and tossed his body onto land that they knew belonged to the Native Americans within the area. They figured they would say that he was ambushed, or they were ambushed, and that's how him and the other guy died. All the while keeping their secret of what they did to these poor people on the farm. Now, after they finished dealing with the body of the captain of theirs and their fallen comrade, they came back, dismembered the husband, and once again had their way with the women. These guys were sick bastards. Sick bastards. Now, the wife, after they were done doing what they were doing, spoke and said, "Forever, you and your families will be cursed. This land will be cursed. Misfortune will fall upon everything that you touch from this day forward." They slapped her, chopped off her head, cut her up into pieces along with her sister, put them also into the cave where they had put their children, and burned them all. They went to Jebediah Scott, said, "Listen, the land is yours. We've taken care of things. We were never here. Do you understand?" He said, "Of course I understand. Where's your captain?" Now, one of the other soldiers, out of the 4 of them that was left, didn't like the fact that this guy was asking questions. No questions needed to be asked. He should have known fucking better, but he didn't. So he was slain on the spot, ran through, killed right then and there. The land that he wanted so badly, he would not have, for he'd have no life. Now, my story doesn't end there. Doesn't end there. Those 4 soldiers left, went on their way, and all of them met terrible, terrible circumstances very shortly after their crimes. While riding back, one's horse kicked up, startled by something. No one ever knew what. He was thrown from the horse and kicked, trampled, died on the spot. The other 3 continued on, moving forward, trying to get back to their headquarters. During this time period, they stopped to let their horses drink some water. While they were stopped there, one of them fell in to the river, was swept away, never to be seen again. The other 2 started to feel as if this curse that the woman from the farm put on them was real. One of them did anyway. He began to pray, got out his Bible, sat down and started to pray. The other one said, "We must hurry and get back. We must get back." Left him there. Stories have it that he was happened upon by a small hunting party of Native Americans who killed him. He was encroaching on their land and they didn't like it too much, but he was killed, scalped, and left to die, which he did die. The last one did make it back to the headquarters, and before he had a chance to utter the words of the things that had happened in his own recollection of it, he became suddenly ill, started to cough up blood, and died right there. They thought it was some type of disease that killed him. And in those days, if you got sick, well, they quarantined your ass. They didn't fuck around. So immediately, they went to his family because, they assumed that he stopped to see his family before he came to see them. They murdered his family. Fearing that they may or may not have been sick, they didn't want to take any chances. Killed his family and burnt their bodies just to be sure that such disease didn't spread. Now, the other 2 men didn't have families. Well, not families of their own. They came from families, and their families fell upon hard times. All of their children mysteriously passed away over the course of the next few months. Just died. No sickness. Just dropped dead. Literally, they'd be out in the fields working, and then laying on the ground dead they would be. The captain's family, terrible thing happened to them as well. His wife and children were suspected of being loyalists. How this information came about, no one ever found out, but his wife was hung, And the children, well, they were made to little slaves to work the farms of different, captains and officers and such. And eventually they died as well. So all of the people who were involved with the things that happened to the family on the farm met gruesome and terrible ends within a year of this incident happening. But I guess you're wondering what happened with this cave. Well, let me tell you. The cave that I found with the opening in the ground and the entrance also behind the waterfall, I decided I was going to go in. And I did go in. Searched around. Found some journals, some clothing, cooking things, stuff like that. A lantern, small, undisturbed fireplace. Well, not fireplace, but like some rocks where they would burn shit to make a fire. This cave had not been touched, obviously, since I came down there. When I got there, I heard the voices of several men and women having conversations. Couldn't really make out what they were, wasn't really trying to. But the feeling was one of not as if they had been forced into this cave, but as if they chose to live in it normally. Like, I didn't get that feeling of fear and, oh my God, we're being chased and looked for, we must hide here. It almost seemed like they liked it, and the way the cave was set up, it was kind of comfortable. I'm not gonna lie to you, it was pretty big and it was comfortable, you know what I'm saying? They had the little chimney, basically the entrance that went up out of the ground would be probably, was where the fireplace under the ground was. So the smoke would go out. And they obviously lived here in a time period, or had started this cave in a time period before, all this loyalist bullshit happened, and they would be looking for smoke and stuff coming out of the ground. Anyway, so I left the cave, did my little exploring, heard the voices and shit, was pretty pleased. I was like, this is going well. Nobody's trying to kill me, nothing crazy is happening. This is pretty cool. I'm enjoying this. That wouldn't be the case for too much longer, because I decided I'd like to visit, the farm that these people lived on. Visit the cave that their bodies was burned in. And so I did. Left, found a small little map that told me where this farm was. Because remember, there were no records. All this stuff was trying to be, was erased pretty much from history, unless you had local information and accounts from those who were there or descendants of those who were there. So I went to the farm, and when I went to the house, which is not, a typical farmhouse, they weren't like rich. They just had what they had, and they lived the way they lived, and they enjoyed it. It was a nice small house. And I went in, and immediately upon going in, I could feel this sense of just pain and suffering. It made me cry. Tears came to my eyes, welled up, started sniffling like a little baby, wiping my face like, why am I so sad? Right? Then I could hear the screams of women, two in particular, specifically two, screaming, saying, stop it, please, no. Their tormented souls. The door slammed behind me. I turned around quickly. I could hear footsteps coming from upstairs. I got nervous because, these people died in a really bad way. And I highly doubt that their spirits are happy at all. I wouldn't be happy. I'd be pretty fucking mad. Somebody came to my house, did the things that they did, killed my kids, killed me, my husband, took our land, and then just didn't even bury us properly. Just burned us and left us after doing terrible things. Now, one of the things that I did notice about the land is that this is a very green, lush area, but there was no grass or anything growing on any of their land. The trees were dead. The ground was rocky and black. Just terrible. But the house itself was in pretty good condition. It was weird because like it was still the old-timey house. It was, you know, this whole developed area, but this one patch of land and ground and house was left alone, and it seems like it was never touched from the time that they died until this point, until when I went in there, right? So I can hear a voice calling out names. I can't remember what the names are, so forgive me, but they were saying names. I'm assuming they were the names of the children because there were 4 names. Let's just say it was John, Jacob, Jingleheimer, right? John, Jacob, Jingleheimer. John, Jacob, Jingleheimer, come, we must tend to the land. I heard the door open. I looked, the door opens. And I could hear footsteps going out. The door closed. Then I could hear the sound of what sounded like somebody pouring water from a bucket into a basin, and the sound of splashing. But there was nothing there. There was no one there. It's just noise. Walked around the house for a little while. I decided I would leave because things just weren't feeling all that great. You know what I'm saying? I didn't want to ask any questions. I didn't want to take any readings. I could hear what I needed to hear, and I heard the story, and the story was terrible enough. And I'd seen enough on this land to realize that this land is most likely cursed. Now, before I left, I wanted to check one more place. Just one more place, you know. The cave that they were burnt in. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, that's not a very smart idea. No, it's not. After the things that I've heard and read, you would think that I would just go. You know, I've seen enough. I've heard enough. Did my little exploring. But you know me, I gotta do what I gotta do, so I did what I did, and I went to the cave. I asked, are you the family of the farm? Are you still here? Immediately I felt the heat on my face, like maybe I had some hot sauce or something, right? Got intensely hot. Whew. It felt like my skin was on fire. I backed away from the cave. I could hear sounds of crackling, like burning wood, coming from the cave, but there was nothing in the cave. It was empty. Or so I thought. There were a couple of stones, nice-sized stones, that were kind of blocking the entryway of the cave, and then a few smaller stones on top of those stones. So I began to move the smaller stones away from the opening. And as soon as I did that, I saw the faces of a man and a woman. They looked tormented and tortured. Scared the shit out of me. But, you all know, I don't eat before I do investigations for that reason alone. We don't want any accidents. Accidents aren't good. Bad enough to be scared. Enough worse if you're scared and you stink because you shit your pants. So no pants shitting happened, thank goodness. Although I had that feeling in my stomach that was not good. And I was scared. But I felt like there was something that I could do here that might help bring rest to these souls. So I began to move the rest of the rocks away from this opening. At this point, I could see the children's faces. One of them was a baby. And I mean, like, a baby. Not one, but baby. Hold him, cuddle him, cradle him, baby. And the sister. So here I am looking at these 7 faces, and they're looking back at me. First with anger. But then they could recognize that I'm obviously not the guy that had anything to do with their passing, because I'm a black guy. You know, they were killed by other colonial people, which were British people, which means they were Caucasian. So I was lucky there. Lucky. I did not look like or was a descendant of any of the people that had anything to do with their demise. Immediately, the look of anger was replaced with a look of relief. Almost like you just took a really nice shit and you're just like, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying, right? Anyway, they started to float towards the opening of the cave. And as they floated out from the cave, vegetation began to grow under their entities' bodies' presences. If that makes any sense. I don't think any of that I just said makes sense. But, you know, they floated out and grass and shit started growing under them. Flowers and things. You know, the land began to come back to life. The father looked at me. He said, "Thank you. We are forever in your gratitude." Now I'm thinking, right, that they're gonna float off and go to heaven or some shit. No, it's not what they did. The father grabbed the baby, picked him up, and handed him to the wife. The sister grabbed the hands of 2 of the younger children, and the 10-year-old held the hand of his father. And they walked across their land towards their home. And as they did, grass and things started to come to life. Trees began to sprout leaves. They went into their home, and that was it. I left their property, perplexed, feeling a sense of achievement, but at the same time still having many questions. But I knew that what I had done that day was something that would be forever an energy within me of good. I had brought good closure and untrapped these people. So I left. I got in my car, as usual, and I went home. I thought everything was everything. But it wasn't. I'd wake up in the middle of the night having these terrible nightmares. Nightmares of me being beaten, killed, watching children die. And this plagued me for at least 2 or 3 months. I knew I had to go back. Something was wrong. Something was not right. So I went back about 6 months after my initial visit. I went to the land and I noticed that the land had come back to life. It was growing and it looked like somebody had started farming the land once again. There was like a small batch of vegetables growing, things of that nature. And I found this to be odd because when I first visited it, it was deserted, dead land. And of course, like I said, the people around it just didn't bother with it. They knew better. But I went back. I went to the house. I knocked on the door because I just felt like that was the right thing to do. I mean, I saw their spirits go into the house, and I'm assuming they're still at the house. So I knocked on the door. And a voice answered. "Who is there?" Said it's Reese. I let you guys out of the cave the other day, like 6 months ago and stuff. Just coming by to, the door opened, but there was no one inside. It was completely empty. It looked exactly the same way as the day that I left it. So I walked in, reluctantly. I was still a little nervous. And as I walked in, the door closed behind me. And I sat down at the table. And as I sat down, the figures, the ghosts of the family started to appear. And they were just doing normal, everyday family stuff. The husband was talking to the wife, making jokes about whatever you make jokes about in, colonial times. The sister was tending to the children. They were sitting down at the table, eating what looked like oatmeal and stuff. She's holding the baby. Everything seemed joyous and wonderful, like a regular day in life. Then a knock came at the door. The sister went to open the door, and before me played out the entire thing which brought them to their demise. And it was a terrible thing. It was bad enough to read it, but it was even worse to have to witness it play out in front of my eyes. I curled up in the fetal position like a child after witnessing the brutality of these men to these women and children. It was terrible. After I witnessed all this, up to the deaths and them being put into the cave where they were entombed, well, their bodies and remains entombed and burned, they faded away. But before they all faded away, they each looked at me and smiled. Even the baby looked at me and smiled, which was creepy as fuck because it was a baby. And, babies don't usually look at people and smile unless, you're cooing in their face and making baby noises and shit like that. He just, turned his little baby head, looked over at me, smiled, and then faded away, as they all did. And then the door opened. And that was it. I walked out, and I've never been back since. Never been back since. I don't think I ever will go back either. And I would suggest that nobody else go, because there's just nothing else to see now. Now it's just an old colonial house with land. Thank you for joining me for another one of OmenG's Stupid Scary Stories.